the consumers that'll suffer, that the prices will get passed on to. But you're saying there's no proof of that historically.
Not only is there no proof, it's just completely untrue.
Wow.
Hello, I'm Linda Vu. Welcome to my channel. Tariffs are not taxes. I know that's a provocative statement, and I know some of you are ready to fight me on it. We're going to get right into it with my next interview with historian Bob Ingraham. It has everything to do with understanding what we weren't taught in school, the American system of economics, what Trump is reviving today with such tools as tariffs. My interview will be in 3 parts. 1, Bob Ingraham will dig right into what is the American system, why tariffs aren't taxes. 2, Trump, tariffs, hyperinflation, and the Iran war. 3, something very important to address, libertarians and why they do not agree with Trump's tariffs or much of his economic policies. Let's dig right in. Enjoy. If you learned something, subscribe to my channel. Thank you.
Now, I have a very special guest today, historian Bob Ingraham, the in-house historian with Promethean Action. He's someone who, when I was in my 20s and actually getting me involved in politics, Bob Ingraham and his wife, Andrea Ingraham, from what I'm getting today from talking to the American population, that tariffs are just merely taxes. Tariffs are not taxes. That is such a provocative statement. Why is that? Why aren't tariffs taxes? How is that the case? So I have Bob Ingraham here, who have been studying this for many, many years, many decades. I've written many books on this topic, on national banking, on McKinley. I thought, tariffs is just a tax on imports. But you're saying it's actually not a tax in the way that people think of it today. Let's pull this thread and get right into it.
Okay. All right. Let me just preface it a little bit, because this question of the American system of economics is something which a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their heads around, largely because of miseducation in the universities, incompetent economics departments in the universities. And I'll just reference one thing, which is during the Civil War, probably the most important economic advisor to Abraham Lincoln was a man named Henry Carey, who is really unknown today, or almost unknown. Some people know of him. But he was the premier American economist of that era, of the mid to late 19th century. And he wrote a work once where he discussed the American system versus the British system. And what he said was, and I'm just paraphrasing this because I don't have it in front of me, he said there are 2 economic systems before the world: the American system and the British system. And then he went on to discuss what the difference was between the 2. Now, if you were to ask most college graduates today, what is the difference between the American system of economics and the British system of economics, they wouldn't be able to answer you. They would say, well, the American system and the British system are the same thing. Free enterprise, free trade, capitalism. This is what we're both based on. Great, Great Britain and the United States. But that's not what Henry Carey said. And that's not what the truth is. Because one is a system of financial, monetary profit, exploitation, imperial financial economics, and the other is a system of scientific, industrial, and technological growth, which benefits the entire population, which lifts up the entire population. And if you don't understand that difference, you can't discuss any of these things competently. Tariffs, taxes, banking, anything else. You just can't discuss them competently because you're trapped in the axioms of British economics. Now, as to tariffs and taxes, it's really not that hard to understand. To understand it, you also have to understand what happened when the Federal Reserve was brought in 1913. Because prior to the Federal Reserve, we had a system where all money that was in circulation was put into circulation by the government, by acts of Congress and by the Treasury Department, where the money that was printed and circulated was authorized by the U.S. government and was put into circulation by the U.S. government through the private banking system. And the way in which the government was financed, the way in which the government got revenue, was primarily through tariffs. There were a few other things, taxes on alcohol and tobacco, but primarily the income of the U.S. government was through tariffs. So tariffs provided the revenue for the government, but at the same time, tariffs were used to protect and promote massive advances in manufacturing, in technology, in science, in productivity, in production, in agriculture. And so tariffs had an extraordinarily positive effect on uplifting the entire productive economy of the United States, which then provided well-paying jobs to millions and millions of Americans. So the beneficial effects were enormous. Now, when the Federal Reserve came in, the entire financing and functioning of the federal government, along with our banking system, changed fundamentally to something entirely different, an entirely different species. Because when the Federal Reserve came in, this was also at a time when the tariff rates were reduced. We had very high tariffs from Abraham Lincoln through William McKinley. And then they went down a little bit, but they continued under Taft and Teddy Roosevelt. But when Woodrow Wilson came in, they brought in the Federal Reserve, they brought in the income tax, and they dramatically reduced tariffs. So when the Federal Reserve came in, what happened is that the federal government began to operate on a debt system. This did not exist before 1913, where the federal government began to exist permanently on a system of massive indebtedness. And it began to borrow money from the private banks. And of course, the money to do that was printed by the Federal Reserve, which was unconstitutional, not part of the federal government. Money was no longer issued by the Congress and by the Treasury Department. Money was now issued by the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve loaned money to the private banks, not to the federal government, but to the private banks. And the private banks then loaned money to the federal government. And in order to pay these growing federal debts and the operating expenses of the government, the income tax was brought in, and the income tax was then used to finance the deficit spending, finance the debts, the interest and principal payments of the federal debt, and in fact, to finance the government itself, the income tax. So on the one hand, you had a system where under the tariff system, no money was taken out of the pockets of the American people. The tariffs were paid by the foreign importers, companies that wanted to bring goods into the United States. They paid the tariffs. Now, you could say this was passed along to the American consumers through higher prices, but not really, because if you look at what happened during the era of tariffs, under McKinley, for instance, steel production, auto production, glass production, chemical production, machine tool production. And you could examine this on your own. If you look at this, the tariffs allowed new industries to be developed in the United States. And as those industries developed and became more advanced, like with Henry Ford in the auto industry, but that's just one example, prices actually dropped what they had been lower than they had been before the tariffs. Cost of aluminum, cost of oil, cost of this, cost of that. The prices went down under the tariffs. because new modern industries, more productive industries, were developed in the United States. So the American consumers paid nothing. First of all, they didn't pay the tariffs. And secondly, prices actually went down under tariffs, right? And the tariffs financed the government. Now, what happens under the system that replaced that? The Federal Reserve, federal income tax system, low tariff system, is that as the tariffs were reduced, more cheap imports came in, damaging the American productive economy. But meanwhile, without the income from the tariffs, because tariffs under McKinley provided 60% of the federal budget. And as that revenue was eliminated, the federal government began this new paradigm, this new system where the federal government, to replace the income on tariffs, just began borrowing money, borrowing more and more money. And then the income tax was brought in to pay off those government debts. So under the tariff system, American workers benefited. They actually got lower prices, millions of jobs from new American industries, higher wages, and the American workers benefited. Under the Federal Reserve income tax system and low tariff system, the government went increasingly into debt, income taxes were raised. So basically, the government reached into the pockets of American workers in the form of the income tax, took money out of the pockets of American workers with the income tax to finance U.S. government debt, which was a result of getting rid of the tariffs. The whole thing is a con game. It's really replacing a productive system.
And the federal U.S. government debt post Federal Reserve goes towards whom?
The federal government becomes a debtor of the private banking system, which had not existed up to that point.
And that's a critical difference between Hamilton's intent with the National Bank.
Yeah, the National Bank was forbidden to loan money to the private banks. Now, it is the case during emergencies and what have you, the federal government would issue treasury notes and bonds. Like at the beginning of the Civil War, we did that before the greenbacks, where certain treasury notes and bonds would be issued for specific projects or specific things or in time of emergency or wartime. But that is not how the government operated day to day. We did not do that. The government did not, as a matter of routine, borrow money to cover its operating expenses and costs. That didn't exist.
That's incredible, because that's the argument that you get coming from free marketers, libertarians on this question of arguing against tariffs from Democrats today and in the late 1800s, right? Is that it's the consumers that'll suffer, that the prices will get passed on to. But you're saying there's no proof of that historically.
Not only is there no proof, it's just completely untrue. I mean, the tariffs, this was called the era of protection, 1861 to 1901, from the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln to the assassination of William McKinley. And as I said, it really sort of continued for about 10 years after McKinley's assassination. But the era of protection, 1861 to 1891. And particularly when you get into the period of McKinley himself, but really under Lincoln, but Lincoln was fighting the Civil War. But when you get into the period of McKinley himself, enormous prosperity, millions upon millions of productive jobs. And wages went up and people became homeowners and, enormous prosperity as a result of all of this. I mean, the argument that tariffs produce high prices, this really goes back even earlier to the time of Hamilton and others prior to the Civil War, because the Southerners didn't want high tariffs, by and large. Some in the South recognized, supported it. But the Southern economy was really a colonial economy. It's like the way the British Empire ran their colonies, where the colonies were expected, or it was demanded, that the colonies produce only raw materials.
Yeah.
Cotton, coffee, this, that, the other thing, only raw materials, which is the same way that globalization works today. It's the same exact thing. These are colonial, imperialist economic and financial policies. Colonies produce, or de facto colonies like we have today, produce raw materials. And meanwhile, all their manufactured goods are imported. Now, if you're living in the South in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, your entire economy is cotton production and a few other things, cotton, tobacco. So you're selling all this cotton, and you're selling tobacco, and you're selling other agricultural goods primarily to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not producing anything. You have no manufacturing. So you want to get your manufactured goods as cheap as you can get them. So that was the South before the Civil War. But that's an economy in which a handful of people become wealthy, but it's an economy of enormous poverty. And it wasn't just that it was a slave-based economy in the South, because it was slave-based.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the white population in the South prior to the Civil War, the vast majority of them were extraordinarily poor.
Right.
Extraordinarily poor, dirt farmers. It was a plantation economy. And they all were against the tariffs. Whereas if you look at places like Ohio and Indiana and Wisconsin and Illinois and those areas, which were brought in, as free states as part of the Northwest Territories, where you had free labor and then you had protective tariffs, these developed into the most productive areas in the country. Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland,
You said, but there were some supportive tariffs from the Southerners, though.
There were some who were a little smarter than the others.
Okay.
There were people who wanted to industrialize the South.
Okay.
And they did a few good things, but they were in the minority.
Interesting.
People think that the South, just everyone in the South was in favor of seceding. But if you go back to 1860, 1861, when they had these votes in the South,
yeah.
And particularly, I think more than half of the states who seceded actually had state conventions. It wasn't just the legislature that voted, but they held state conventions to secede. And if you go back and look at those votes, and they're all on record, it's all there. Most of these states who voted to secede, it was like 51 to 49, 52 to 48, 53 to 47%,
mm-hmm.
right? There was massive opposition to secession in the South. Massive opposition to secession. But anyway, that's a little bit different than the whole question of tariffs and taxes and what happened.
No, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. There were patriotic people and there were smart people in the South, but they all lost out eventually to the drive for secession, which was really led by the most rabid people in particularly South Carolina and Georgia and a couple of the deep South states, Alabama, Mississippi.
It sounds like a story or chapter to be told for another time.
Yeah.
It's bringing back to today's world where the prices that we do face now, rise of gas and whatnot, and how we're going to see prices going down over time.
First of all, the people who say the inflation under Trump is due to tariffs or what have you, it's just really nonsense. And it is provable that there's no truth to that. The fact of the matter is, what we have now is we have this crisis with Iran. And this has resulted in a dramatic increase in gasoline prices, right? And a few other things, right? But primarily gasoline. All right, that's a special issue. This is something which has arisen because of the conflict with Iran. It is not long term. It is transitory. And when the crisis in Iran is resolved, this crisis with gasoline prices and everything else will be resolved along with it. But otherwise, if you put that to one side, the Iran war, gasoline, if you put it to one side, the fact is that inflation has come down under Trump. The inflation under Biden, the real dramatic increase, dramatic increase in food prices, this all occurred under Biden, along with most of the other inflation on imported goods. And if you look at what Trump has done, he has actually slowed down. He hasn't eliminated the inflation, but he has dramatically slowed down the inflation. That's not me claiming that. The government figures are there, which prove conclusively that this is the case. But overall, you have to realize that we have been on the wrong track in terms of monetary and economic policy for decades. And to make the transformation where we are focused like a laser on rebuilding the productive economy of the United States, which is really what will bring inflation completely down entirely. That's not something you do in 12 months or 24 months. This is going to take years, but it is clearly what Trump is already beginning to do in terms of energy, not just oil and gas, but nuclear energy, many other things, new industries, brand new industries, revitalizing older industries, which were declining for a long period of time. It is a productive economy, a technologically progressive productive economy in depth, not just one project here and there, but in depth, which will both create millions of productive jobs, but will also solve the problem of inflation. It is not tariffs which are creating the problem with inflation. Yeah. For instance, people think, well, food, what about food prices? A lot of the food in the United States right now is imported, particularly produce and things like that. Yeah. A lot of the food is imported. We have no tariffs on imported food. There are no tariffs on imported food. And otherwise, in terms of the price of things that are produced in the United States, which include beef and poultry and pork and what have you, although a lot of that is imported, but other foods which are produced inside the United States, Trump is actually going after this, taking steps to go after the major food cartels, like the beef producers, the pork producers, etc. Not the farmers, not the ranchers. It's the cartels. We have a cartelization of food production controlled by a small handful of companies, Cargill and some others. And they sort of play the same role with food production that the big pharmaceutical companies play in pharmaceuticals and drug production. And this is where the game is rigged. Mm-hmm. This is where the huge monopolistic control generates enormous financial profits for these cartels, while the farmers and ranchers themselves get squeezed. Right. And the consumers pay higher prices. It's the same exact thing you see in the pharmaceutical company, where, they produce some pill that costs 50 cents to produce, but you have to buy it for $50.
This is sort of a side question, to Tariff, but is there a reason why beef prices is just almost astronomical that the normal Americans can't afford protein?
This is the reason. It's not because
these cartels are just driving the prices.
It's a cartelization of the agro business. It really started to take off in the 1970s and 80s And it's just gotten dramatically worse in the last 20 years or so.
My boyfriend and I went, to just a regular restaurant and just to get a burger. It was like almost $25.
Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, look, what's happened is the financialization of the U.S. economy. Really, not the whole U.S. financial system and the economy. And this gets back to this question of you can't understand anything. You can point to certain things, you can complain about certain things, but if you don't understand the difference between the British system of economics and the American system of economics, you'll never figure this out and you'll come to the wrong conclusions.
Right.
And this is the problem with the way they teach economics in universities. I mean, you get people who come out of Berkeley or Stanford or Harvard or wherever, any of these schools, including some of the Christian schools. And, you get these smart aleck people who got a degree in economics and they think they're real experts on it. And most of these people have been miseducated. They've been miseducated.
I completely agree, because what we're also getting is that many people who voted for Trump, many people on the so-called right, conservatives, Christians, who do not support Trump on the tariff questions, right, or on his economic stances in general.
Yeah, they don't understand.
Libertarians.
They don't. Yeah, libertarian. Look, what's libertarian? What are who?
And we have many libertarian friends who do support.
It's the British system. I mean, look, the British system is based entirely. It's really an immoral system, amoral and immoral, because what it says is human beings, and Adam Smith says this directly, explicitly. Bernard de Mandeville, who influenced Adam Smith, he says this directly, explicitly, that human beings are motivated by greed, and by self-interest. And the entire British imperial financial system, the British Empire itself, is based on greed and self-interest. And what they say, is that this is normal because this is what human nature is. That human nature is to be motivated by greed and self-interest. Well, that's not what the American Republic was founded on. We weren't founded on that idea at all. The American Republic was founded on Christian principles. And if you go back and you read the writings of the Pilgrims, or if you read the writings of the Puritans, of John Winthrop, if you look at Cotton Mather, his on his work on doing good, the idea is, the way people get brainwashed today into libertarianism and into free trade economics is what Henry Carey said, is there are two economic systems before the world: the British imperial system and the American republican system. That's what Henry Carey said. Well, what people are brainwashed with today is they're told, yes, there are two systems before the world, but the systems are the American system of free trade and free enterprise versus communism, totalitarianism. So you are either for communism or you are for the American and British system of free enterprise and free trade. So people listen to that and they say, well, I'm not for communism, so I've got to be for free enterprise and free trade. And that means, because that's the only place you have freedom, right? I want to have freedom. I want to have the freedom to do what I want. I want to have the freedom and the liberty to invest as I want to invest and to make money and what have you. Well, under the American system, you have the freedom, the real American system, Hamilton's American system, Henry Carey's American system, McKinley's American system. You have the freedom to invest and to create businesses and to make money and to become a millionaire. But the idea is that the government is going to keep an eye on what's going on and to encourage productive investment in a way that makes the country stronger, more prosperous, developing technologically, and which benefits all of the people. Because you're not trying to create a nation where a handful of people get super rich and the majority of the people are poor. That's not the American system. There's nothing wrong with people getting rich. But what you are trying to do, it's not a question of spreading the wealth. We're not talking about spreading the wealth. We're not talking about a welfare state. We're talking about creating a productive economy where you are creating opportunities for more. You are creating opportunities for people to climb up the ladder, to advance themselves. Whereas everything today, if you look at how things operate today, everything today is about monetary profit, monetary profit, monetary profit.
I think you're making it very clear, but I think academically in schools, they actually are a little bit more clever or more manipulative, where they actually couch it in this whole efficiency of consumerism. Like, where do we, where is it most efficient to allocate resources? They don't come out and say, yes, we should just all go for greed. It's all implied in.
Oh, it's built in. It's like taken for granted.
How are we going to best allocate resources? Of course, it's going to be cheaper in the third world, right? You're not gonna pay the American at this higher rate. You're of course going to pay, you're going to pay a Mexican, you're going to pay a Vietnamese, you're going to pay, Chinese cheaper. Of course, that's going to be what's smarter, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, they're not going to come out and say, what we're doing is based on greed, but it's all built into what's going on. I mean, are you pursuing? It's like companies today who we have to re-educate the people besides the financial system and all of the financial speculation, which is just useless. We have to recreate or re-educate our corporate leaders because, I mean, you get a situation today where if some corporation has a couple of financial quarters in a row where they make huge profits, what do? Well, a lot of these corporations, they'll either pay out more in shareholder values, dividends to their stockholders, or they'll buy back their stock. Because if they buy back their stock and the stock is going up, then they become much richer. And that is not the way corporations used to operate. I mean, if you go back to the 1960s, 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, the time of McKinley, the time of Henry Ford, Westinghouse, Thomas Edison, all of these people, the common practice was as profits came in, the vast bulk of those profits were invested in new plant and equipment, new technologies, scientific and industrial breakthroughs, higher wages for their workers. Henry Ford and George Westinghouse prided themselves that they paid the highest wages in America for blue collar workers. While
You never hear about that.
Yeah, while Henry Ford is paying double and triple the wages of everyone else, the price of his car kept going down and down and down. When they first started making the Model Ts, which was the first big car that he had other experimental models, but when he first started making the Model T, it sold for over $1,000, which was a lot of money in 1910, 1915. But within, 5, 6, 7 years, they got the price of the Model T down to $300. So it went from more than $1,000 to $300, while at the same time they were increasing wages for their workers. Mm-hmm. This was all done through new technological breakthroughs, new machine tool breakthroughs, new industrial breakthroughs, capital investment in new plant and equipment. I mean, I remember one of these guys, Andrew Carnegie, he was not the greatest guy in the world. He did not pay high wages. One of the things Carnegie did is he built a steel mill somewhere around Pittsburgh, and they were in production for a couple of years, and it was a steel mill that was working. But then a new technological breakthrough came along, which revolutionized steel production. And what they did was they took the old steel mill, which was only a few years old, and they tore it down to the ground. They demolished it, and they built an entirely new steel mill with this new process, right? This is the way American companies used to operate. And not just the big companies like, steel and auto and what have you, but shoe manufacturers, these other manufacturers, small businesses, always capital investment in production. And this is how the American system operates. Today, everything is sliced and diced as to where can we squeeze out various slivers of monetary profit, of financial profit. This is the mentality. This is how things operate. And of course, if you really want to become a billionaire today, you don't go into manufacturing or agriculture. You go into hedge funds. You go into private equity markets. And this is all just how do we manipulate the financial markets so that we can make the maximum amount of money, right? That's death to a productive economy. People should be able to make people should be able to invest in a way, I mean, like in the stock market or something or other markets where you can make, profits. But if you have your entire economy and an entire financial system and banking system focused almost exclusively on financial and monetary profit, that's doomed. There's no future to that.
So, back to what you were discussing, the fundamental conception of the British system of thinkers. Well, I guess you wouldn't call them thinkers, right? Adam Smith, Bernard Maniville, Locke, the basis of the British economic system, globalization, free market, is that their sense of freedom versus the American school, the American system of economic school. Two completely idea of freedoms. One's idea of freedom is based off of an animalistic freedom.
Yeah.
Right? Freedom for greed, freedom to kill, freedom to whatever. It's freedom for bestiality, freedom for sins. And Hamilton, George Washington, Ben Franklin, their idea of freedom is something humanistic.
Yeah, it's freedom to create, freedom to develop. I mean, you look at all of Benjamin Franklin's experiments in electricity and other things that Franklin's stove he invented, other things he invented, the lightning rod. You look at the fact that he created the library company of Philadelphia. He created the General Hospital in Philadelphia. He created the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. It's you are building for the future for the common good. Now, if you're building for the common good, that has nothing to do with collectivism or communism. You're building for the common good because you have a moral sense that you're trying to advance both the conditions of life and the opportunities for the entire population.
Or a freedom that is actually tied to a Christian sense of
A Christian concept. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I like to, just to give such a clear story. I went to a debate recently, Republican versus a Democrat debate, and brought up this question of tariffs. President of the Berkeley College Republican freaked out on tariffs and he went over, he was freaked out about it so much that he actually aligned himself with the Democratic speaker and just like shook his hand. Yeah, this is where we agree. This is where we agree.
Yeah, well,
I'm like, do you not
right,
like see that there is a problem here when you agree with your so-called, enemy on this matter?
Well, I am, I've stopped being astounded by it, but it's incredible to me, the phenomenon of what you might call so-called Christian libertarians. people who think of themselves as devout Christians, but who support libertarianism and free market economics. To me, it is incomprehensible how people can reconcile that in their own mind. Because if you are a Christian, you should be guided by Christian love towards all of your fellow human beings. Libertarianism and British free market, really imperial economics and finance is all based on self-interest. Me, 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 me. So how you can, in your own mind, do the juggling act and reconcile those two things is a mystery to me.
Cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance.
More than that, soul dissonance. Yeah.
I mean, the idea how you can harden your heart to other people, to me, this is not right. Look, the way that these Democrat progressives define equity. This is wrong. The idea that we're going to make everyone equal. That's not the American system. That is communism, or whatever you want to call it. But the idea that we're going to have equal opportunity and that give everyone the opportunity to advance. Some people aren't going to make it. Some people are, but you're trying you're still governed by love and compassion for your fellow citizens, for your fellow human beings. But the idea that you're going to sort of harden your heart towards people like homeless people or drug addicts or what have you, I don't see how you could be a Christian and do that. It's to me, it's incomprehensible.
Well, this has been such a deeply delightful discussion, and I would just like to give you the last minute or two or three to end however you would like to end.
Well, the only way I would end it is that, this is what Trump is doing right now. It's not the same as Hamilton. It's not the same as McKinley, or it's not the same as Lincoln. But if you look at what he is doing, like through this, where he just set up it's not really a bank, but they set up this investment fund, I think several $100 billion or something, maybe more. They're going to invest, not spending taxpayer money, but it's an investment fund where they are going to invest and loan money towards advanced technologies, which go beyond just the question of defense. It goes into things like nuclear technology and other technologies. And if you look at what he's doing with energy, and if you look at what he's doing with a number of these things, he is attempting to reverse 40 to 50 years of wrong-headed economics, wrong-headed free market economics, British economics, which have created the mess that we're in right now. And when you see people who are saying, well, no, we've got to have more, free market economics, you're dealing with people who just don't know what they're talking about, who can't think. The question right now is we need a real economic renaissance in America. And what I mean is a productive economic renaissance, not just more schemes on how we can squeeze profits out of things, but a productive economic renaissance. We're seeing that in a lot of areas right now. We need to see a lot more of it. And it's got to grow, and it's got to spread to every corner of the United States. And that's the battle. That's the battle, for the future. So that's what I would say.
This is Bob's second to latest book that I'm currently reading on William McKinley. This is on Amazon. His Substack is wonderful, so please subscribe on there. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. There'll be more to come. My next guest will be Brian Lance. We're going to get right into the excitement of what is happening in the United States that you're not hearing about with mainstream trad media. Thank you. Bye-bye.